Imagine waking up in medieval Europe and realizing your face is legally too expressive. Eyebrows slightly raised? That's a sin. Teeth visible when you smile? Immediate scandal. Tonight, we're uncovering the brutal beauty rules that turned every glance into a moral test where women bleached their skin with lead, starved themselves to appear saintly, and risked poisoning just to meet an impossible standard. You think modern beauty culture is harsh? Wait until you hear what happened if your forehead wasn't high enough. In medieval Europe, the color of your skin wasn't about preference. It was a walking billboard advertising your social status. Pale, ghostly skin meant you were wealthy enough to stay indoors all day. It showed you didn't have to labor in fields or markets. But achieving that look wasn't as simple as avoiding sunlight. Women went to terrifying lengths to bleach their skin white, using methods that would make modern dermatologists faint. One popular mixture, called Venetian ceruse, combined lead and vinegar into a thick paste. Women slathered it on their faces daily, unaware it was slowly poisoning them. The lead seeped into their bloodstream, causing muscle weakness, hair loss, and eventually organ failure. Queen Elizabeth I used this dangerous paste, and portraits show her skin unnaturally pale, but they don't show the ulcers and scars hidden beneath the makeup wash. Some women took even more extreme measures. They drained their own blood through leeches or cuts, believing this would weaken their complexion. Others applied toxic mixtures containing mercury, which caused burns and nerve damage. There are records of noblewomen developing bluish-gray skin from years of lead exposure, making them look even paler until their teeth started falling out. Elizabeth of York became famous for her delicate complexion, but surviving accounts suggest she suffered constant headaches and fatigue from her beauty regimen. Court physicians warned against the lead pastes, but nobody listened. Women would rather risk chronic pain than appear lower class. Some makeup recipes even included ground-up bone or pearls, which scratched the skin but added a prized luminous glow. The irony was that while rich women poisoned themselves trying to look pale, rural workers actually had healthier skin from sunlight and fresh air. But health didn't matter, only perception did. A hint of color in your cheeks could get you labeled as a laborer, and marriage prospects would vanish overnight. Women knew the risks, but applied their deadly makeup anyway. Being pale didn't just mean you were beautiful. It meant you were worthy of survival in a world where appearance dictated everything. And if your complexion passed inspection, time to face the next brutal standard, your forehead. Because in medieval Europe, having the wrong hairline could ruin your reputation just as fast as the wrong skin tone. Forget contouring, medieval women were literally erasing their hairlines to meet beauty standards. A high, domed forehead wasn't just a preference, it signaled intelligence, nobility, and virtue. Women plucked their hairlines back further with tweezers, sometimes scrubbing their skin with pumice stones to slow regrowth. Some went so far that they created permanent bald patches where hair would never grow back. The fashion originated from religious art, where saints and the Virgin Mary were depicted with unnaturally high foreheads. This made the look not just desirable, but spiritually aspirational. Women who couldn't achieve it naturally, or through brutal plucking, often wore headdresses designed to cover their real hairlines while creating the illusion of extra forehead height. The hennin, that iconic cone-shaped hat, wasn't just decorative, it served as a medieval version of forehead padding. Isabeau of Bavaria, queen consort of France, was rumored to have bald spots from years of overplucking. Court documents mention her ordering expensive ointments to soothe the inflamed skin, where hair had been ripped out repeatedly. Other noblewomen used vinegar-soaked cloths to burn their hairlines into submission, enduring the stinging pain for weeks to get the look right. There was a dark psychological aspect to this trend. A smooth, expansive forehead made facial expressions harder to read, which was valuable since displaying emotion was seen as weak or sinful. The more blank and statue-like a woman's face appeared, the more virtuous she was considered. Paintings from the era show eerie, elongated faces, with brows plucked nearly to the crown of the head, almost alien in their stillness. What few realized was how permanent the damage could be. Chronic plucking destroyed hair follicles, leaving women reliant on head coverings for life. Some turned to dangerous hair growth potions containing mercury or quicklime, which only worsened the problem. Others wore prosthetic velvet forehead pieces glued with adhesive made from tree resin, a messy and uncomfortable solution. The trend filtered down through all social classes, though peasant women didn't have time for daily tweezer sessions. Instead, they tied their hair back so tightly it caused traction alopecia, a baldness still seen today in people who wear tight braids or extensions. Those who resisted the trend faced mockery. Records describe women with normal hairlines being called brow-heavy or peasant-faced, insults that could damage marriage prospects. Portraits of the wealthy show how extreme the trend became. Some women, D foreheads that took up nearly half their face. The look was so ingrained that when the Renaissance brought softer features into fashion, some older women couldn't adapt. Their hairlines had receded too far. The irony? Many portraits depicting these ultra-high foreheads were altered by artists to please patrons. Real women's hairlines were scrubbed out and repainted higher in their own commissioned portraits, creating records of a fantasy look that few naturally possessed. Even their images couldn't escape embellishment. While foreheads were being reshaped, another facial feature was being erased entirely: eyebrows. Because in medieval Europe, having expressive brows wasn't just unfashionable, it was practically a moral failing. In medieval Europe, eyebrows were considered a liability. Visible brows signaled emotional expression, which was dangerous for women. The ideal face had brows so faint they barely existed, just a ghostly suggestion of hair above the eyes. Women achieved this by plucking daily with finely crafted tweezers, sometimes rubbing the area with walnut oil to prevent regrowth. Some went further, shaving them off completely and redrawing thin lines with soot or charcoal. Portraits from the period reveal how extreme this trend became. The Virgin Mary was often depicted with no brows at all, setting a religious standard for beauty. Noblewomen followed suit, their faces appearing eerily smooth and blank in paintings. The 15th century poet Eustache Deschamps even wrote that a woman without brows is like stew without salt, implying a face needed this absence to be considered properly refined. But eyebrow removal wasn't just about aesthetics, it served a social function. Raised brows could indicate skepticism, curiosity, or surprise, all emotions considered unseemly for women. Removing them created a neutral, placid expression that signaled obedience. Church teachings emphasized that women should be still as statues, and facial hair undermined that ideal. A browless woman was a controlled woman, and control equaled virtue. The process was agonizing. Wealthy women had servants pluck their brows hair by hair, while others did it themselves with polished metal mirrors. Infections were common from dirty tweezers or the harsh substances used to slow regrowth. Some applied caustic lime mixtures that burned the skin, trading short-term smoothness for long-term scarring. Others used leeches to suck blood from the brow area, believing reduced circulation would stunt hair growth. Upper-class women sometimes replaced their missing brows with false ones made of mouse fur. These were glued on carefully for special occasions, though they often peeled off in humid weather or during dances. More permanent solutions included tattooing faint brow lines, but the inks of the time faded to strange blue or green hues over time. The pressure extended beyond nobility. Even peasant women plucked within their means, using makeshift tweezers fashioned from clamshells or folded metal scraps. Proverbs warned that women with thick brows were shrews or witches, associations that could lead to social exile or worse. In some regions, brides underwent ceremonial brow plucking before weddings, as a sign of submission to their new husbands. Ironically, removing brows didn't eliminate expression, it just made women's faces harder to read. This ambiguity worked in their favor in some cases. A study of medieval legal records found that women with faint brows were more likely to win court disputes, possibly because their unreadable expressions made them seem more authoritative. But the trade-off was permanent. Many women who plucked extensively found their brows never grew back properly, leaving them dependent on cosmetics. The trend peaked in the late Middle Ages when brows were sometimes replaced by forehead jewels or tiny decorative velvet patches. These accessories drew attention upward, emphasizing the coveted high forehead while disguising brow baldness. Some inventive women painted delicate vines or crescents where their brows should be, turning necessity into ornament. Eyebrow fashion varied slightly by region. Italian women kept slightly thicker brows than their French counterparts, while English portraits show a middle ground. But the underlying message was universal. A woman's face should be a passive canvas, not an instrument of communication. The disappearance of brows mirrored the expectation that women themselves should disappear quiet, unobtrusive, and compliant. Medical texts of the time reveal unexpected consequences. Physicians noted that browless women often squinted in sunlight, since they lacked natural shading from hair. Others developed forehead wrinkles prematurely from constantly raising their remaining brow stubs in expression. Some noble women took to wearing veils indoors, not for modesty, but to hide the unintended effects of their beauty regimens. The browless ideal persisted until the Renaissance, when artists began portraying women with more natural features. Even then, older women who had plucked for decades found themselves trapped by fashion, their brows permanently thinned or gone. What began as a trend became a lifelong reminder of beauty standards that treated the female face as public property, subject to constant revision. But the silence didn't stop at the eyes, it extended all the way to the mouth. Because in medieval Europe, smiling too widely wasn't just unfashionable, it could destroy reputations. A smiling woman in medieval Europe was like a walking scandal, not just because smiles weren't ladylike, they were actively dangerous. Teeth should never show when possible, lips must remain closed, and laughter had to be muffled behind hands or sleeves. The ideal mouth was small, still, and silent. Church teachings compared loud women to barking dogs, and medical texts warned that too much smiling could cause premature wrinkles. Women learned early that controlling their mouths meant controlling their futures. Wealthy women went to disturbing lengths to achieve the perfect closed-lip look. Some had servants gently bind their jaws with silk ribbons at night to train their mouths shut. Others used lead-based lip whiteners that caused peeling and sores. The most extreme rubbed pumice stones on their lips to thin them, or applied vinegar-soaked cloths to reduce swelling after accidental smiles. Even speaking required careful calibration. Too much jaw movement revealed teeth, which should ideally remain unseen. Visible teeth were considered vulgar unless they met exact standards. They should be small, even, and preferably yellowish-white, not too white, which suggested witchcraft or vanity. To achieve this, women rubbed their teeth with ground coral or pumice powder, wearing down enamel over time. Some used acidic fruit pulps to yellow teeth slightly, while others chewed parsley leaves to freshen breath discreetly. Mint or rosewater could be dabbed under the nose occasionally, but perfumes were suspect. They might indicate you expected to be close enough to someone for your breath to matter. Breath control became its own silent art. Women carried cloves or fennel seeds in tiny pierced metal balls that hung unseen under their dresses. Chewing gum made from resin or beeswax was done secretly and never in public. One 14th century etiquette manual advised placing a thin slice of dried apple between the cheek and gum before social events, letting it slowly release a faint freshness. Bad breath wasn't just unpleasant, it could imply poor health, rotten teeth, or even moral corruption. Ironically, the methods to maintain this standard often made matters worse. Grinding teeth with abrasives caused cavities and sensitivity. Lead lip paints caused chapping that made closing the mouth painful. Wealthier women who could afford sugar, a rare luxury, found it rotted their teeth behind their carefully closed lips. Some resorted to blackening damaged teeth with soot to hide decay, creating the illusion of small, even gaps when they did speak. The pressure intensified when smiling became associated with lust. Art from the period shows demonic figures grinning widely with exposed teeth, while virtuous women appeared with barely parted lips. Physicians claimed the uterus could shake loose from too much laughter, and troubadour songs warned that visible teeth made women look promiscuous. By the 15th century, some convents required novices to practice speaking without moving their lips excessively, a skill called cloistered speech. Lower-class women had slightly more freedom. Field workers couldn't hide smiles while singing folk songs, and market vendors needed to project their voices. But even they carried twigs to chew discreetly for fresh breath, and parents taught daughters to cover their mouths when laughing. Some working women developed calluses on their lips from years of pressing them tightly together during encounters with superiors. The consequences of failing this standard were severe. Court records show cases where women's laughter was cited as evidence in adultery trials. One 13th century merchant's diary describes rejecting a potential bride because he glimpsed her back teeth when she coughed. Wealthy widows who smiled too freely in portraits found themselves accused of inappropriate behavior. Even aging played a role. Older women who lost teeth were expected to cover their mouths with veils rather than reveal gaps. Some women rebelled quietly. Hildegard of Bingen wrote about smiling freely in her gardens, away from watching eyes. Chaucer's wife of Bath famously flaunted her gap-toothed smile as proof of her sexual experience. But these were exceptions. For most, maintaining the silent mouth was survival. Unmarried women who laughed too loudly risked being labeled shrews. Wives with expressive mouths could be accused of witchcraft after all. Didn't the devil enter through open mouths during yawns? The methods took a toll. Dental remains show medieval women had significantly more wear on their front teeth, from habitual lip-pulling and teeth-covering gestures. Jawbones reveal stress fractures from clenching. Some skulls show evidence of chronic mouth ulcers from acidic tooth cleaners or lip plasters. The perfect closed mouth wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a constant small violence against the body. Yet women complied, training their daughters in the art of the silent mouth as soon as they lost baby teeth. They practiced speaking without moving their cheeks, laughing without sound, coughing into draped sleeves. Some aristocratic girls wore weighted chin straps during embroidery lessons to discourage looking up with parted lips. Mouth maintenance became another chore, like hair plucking or corset lacing, another way the body had to be broken into proper shape. The silent mouth ideal wasn't just about beauty, it was about control. A woman who mastered her mouth mastered her speech, her laughter, her opinions. Closed lips meant closed thoughts, at least in public. But while women policed their mouths, their entire bodies were being reshaped by even more brutal standards. Because in medieval Europe, thinness wasn't just fashionable, it was next to godliness. In medieval Europe, being thin wasn't about diet trends, it was about salvation. The closer you got to looking like a walking skeleton, the holier people assumed you were. Women starved themselves not for beauty alone, but to prove their devotion to God. This wasn't private suffering, it was performance art with spiritual stakes. St. Catherine of Siena set the gold standard. She lived on nothing but communion wafers and raw vegetables, vomiting anything richer. Her ribs and spine became visible through her skin, which contemporaries described as transparent like parchment. What doctors now call holy anorexia made her famous. She represented the ultimate triumph of spirit over flesh. Families bragged when their daughters emulated her, even as those girls wasted away. The mechanics were brutal. Women trained themselves to eat less by chewing food and spitting it out, or filling their stomachs with linen rags soaked in water. Some tied ropes around their waists so tightly they could barely breathe, using the pain to distract from hunger. Wealthy women had servants monitor their food intake, recording every bite in ledgers that doubled as piety reports. Even drinking water was measured too much would bloat the spirit. Church officials cheered this behavior publicly while worrying privately. Too many girls were fainting during Mass from hunger. Some convents had to ban competitive fasting after nuns collapsed from malnutrition. Yet sermons kept praising extreme thinness as evidence of grace. Parents watched daughters shrink with pride. A gaunt daughter improved marriage prospects or convent placement. Her suffering elevated the whole family's status. The contradictions were stark. While peasants starved from crop failures, noble women starved by choice. Rural women working fields needed calories, but urban elites saw appetite as animalistic. Medical texts warned that plumpness caused infertility, while extreme thinness did the same thing. The ideal woman was simultaneously frail enough to need constant care, but strong enough to bear children an impossible balance. Methods varied by class. Wealthy women could afford expensive appetite suppressants like powdered gems or gold flakes in wine. Middle-class women drank vinegar mixtures that eroded their stomach linings. Peasants simply skipped meals. While still working manual labor, their thinness came with exhaustion rather than prestige. But all shared the same cultural pressure. Fat meant failure. Clothing amplified the effect. Dresses were tailored to make waists look unnaturally narrow, with sleeves cut to emphasize bony wrists. Pale skin stretched over visible collarbones became a status symbol. Some women wore chainmail girdles that bruised their hips to maintain posture while limiting food intake. The clinking sound served as a constant reminder of their discipline. The psychological toll was severe. Letters from the period reveal girls as young as 12 obsessively measuring their wrists with ribbons, crying if they couldn't knot them tighter. Mothers encouraged this, believing suffering purified the soul. Some women hallucinated from hunger, interpreting visions as divine messages. Others developed ritualistic eating habits that modern doctors would recognize as eating disorders. Men weren't exempt. Clerics fasting for Lent competed to see who could lose the most weight, but women faced harsher scrutiny. A man could be thin or stout based on personal preference, but a woman's body was public property. Brides were inspected for excessive flesh before weddings. Widows had to maintain delicate figures to keep their social standing. Even elderly women were judged. Wrinkles were acceptable if they draped over sharp cheekbones, but not if they sagged over rounded cheeks. The medical consequences lasted generations. Skeletal remains show medieval women had higher rates of osteopenia than men from lifelong malnutrition. Some aristocratic graves contain young women with the bone density of 90-year-olds. Fertility problems spiked among the upper classes, where extreme thinness was most prized. Yet the ideal persisted because it served a purpose. It kept women weak enough to control. Relics of this mindset linger today. Phrases like, "she's so disciplined," when a woman refuses dessert, echo medieval praise of starvation. The idea that thin equals morally superior hasn't disappeared. It's just swapped religious justification for pseudo-scientific health claims. Modern diet culture and medieval piety wear different costumes, but share core scripts. What medieval women understood, and we often forget, is that standards like these aren't really about health or beauty. They're about power. Controlling women's bodies has always been an efficient way to control their lives. A woman focused on measuring her waist isn't questioning social structures. A culture obsessed with her thinness doesn't have to address her hunger for education, autonomy, or equality. But while bodies were being starved into submission, another brutal standard was brewing, this time about hair color. Because in medieval Europe, blonde wasn't just pretty. It was proof of divine favor, and women would risk blindness to get it. Blonde hair in medieval Europe wasn't just fashionable, it was considered evidence of divinity. The Virgin Mary was often depicted with golden locks, linking fair hair to purity and holiness. Naturally occurring blonde hair was extremely rare outside northern regions, making it a coveted trait among nobility across the continent. Women who weren't born with it went to dangerous lengths to fake it, using methods that would make modern hairstylists cringe. The most common bleaching agent was a mixture of stale urine and ashes. Women would collect urine in pots for weeks, letting it ferment until it reached maximum ammonia content. They'd then mix it with beechwood ash to create a paste that would eat away at their hair's pigment. The stench was unbearable, and the mixture often burned scalps, leaving open sores. Some recipes added sulfur or quicklime to intensify the effect, which sometimes caused hair to fall out entirely. Saffron offered a slightly less horrific alternative if you could afford it. The spice cost more than gold by weight, making it a status symbol in its own right. Women would boil handfuls of saffron threads to create a sticky yellow paste that tinted hair. The results were inconsistent. Some got buttery blonde streaks, Others ended up with orange patches that resembled rust stains. Venetian courtesans were known to sleep with saffron-soaked cloths wrapped around their heads, staining their pillows permanently yellow. Southern European women faced particular pressure. Italian poet Petrarch famously idolized blonde-haired Laura as the perfect woman. Despite most Italian women having dark hair, this created brutal standards. Florentine merchant records show fathers paying premiums for blonde wigs made from German women's hair to boost their daughters' marriage prospects. Sicilian women reportedly sat for hours in lemon groves, letting citrus acid lighten their hair while the sun burned their skin. The physical consequences piled up. Chronic exposure to urine mixtures caused eye infections and respiratory problems from the fumes. Saffron irritations led to weeping scalp sores that stained head coverings. Lemon juice made hair brittle. Many women had to cut theirs short after over-bleaching, then hide the damage under veils. Some developed permanent bald spots from chemical burns, relying on horsehair inserts to fill the gaps. Wealthy women who could afford frequent treatments often ended up with thin, fraying hair that looked like straw. Lucretia Borgia became famous when her artificially lightened blonde hair helped broker a political marriage between German and French noble families. Chronicles describe ambassadors specifically noting her angelic hair color during negotiations. But personal letters reveal she suffered chronic migraines from scalp infections and had to wear lead-based ointments that poisoned her slowly. Her hair represented diplomatic success but also personal agony. Darker-haired women navigated a minefield. Some German regions considered brunette women intellectually superior, while Italian city-states associated dark hair with sensuality. But overall, blonde remained the continental ideal. Jewish and Romani women with naturally dark hair faced particular discrimination. Their coloring was sometimes cited as proof of moral inferiority. One French law even fined dark-haired prostitutes double unless they bleached their hair blonde while working. The church amplified these standards. Religious art consistently portrayed saints and biblical heroines as blonde, while darker hair appeared mainly on villains or temptresses. When the Black Death killed scores of blonde Scandinavians, some clerics declared it God punishing Europe for losing its most angelic people. Monasteries paid premium prices for blonde hair shipments to make religious vestments, reinforcing the sacred association. Practical solutions emerged alongside dangerous ones. Some women dusted their hair with yellow pollen or powdered gold for temporary effects. Others wore translucent silk veils that gave hair a golden cast in sunlight. Clever hat designs used clever draping to highlight any blonde streaks while shadowing darker roots. But these were stopgaps. Most women who wanted lasting results had to risk their health. The blonde ideal persisted into the Renaissance, with Venetian women developing slightly safer methods using sunlight and seawater. But medieval damage was often irreversible. Skeletons from the period show scalp lesions consistent with chemical burns. Hair samples reveal extreme protein damage from repeated bleaching attempts. Some noblewomen's portraits clearly depict wigs designed to cover thinning hair caused by their beauty treatments. What began as a religious symbol became a tool of social control. The scarcity of natural blondes made achieving the look a constant expense, keeping women financially dependent on fathers or husbands who funded their treatments. The pain involved became a perverse point of pride. Aristocratic women compared scalp scars like battle wounds. Most tragically, it turned women against each other, with mothers enforcing these standards on daughters who suffered the same burns they had. The racial implications echoed far beyond Europe. When explorers reached the Americas, they initially judged indigenous people's dark hair as evidence of barbarism, using the same logic applied to brunette Europeans. The blonde ideal became a benchmark for human worth that justified atrocities abroad while continuing to torment women at home. It wasn't just hair color, it was a weapon that hacked away at self-worth across continents. But while women agonized over their hair, their entire skeletons were being reshaped by something even more painful: corsetry so restrictive it could crack ribs. Because in medieval Europe, altering your silhouette wasn't about style, it was about structural engineering of the female form. Dressing in medieval Europe was a form of slow torture. The ideal silhouette demanded a body so narrow and elongated that women literally couldn't breathe properly. They achieved this through rigid garments stiffened with reed, whalebone, or even thin strips of metal, the predecessors of Renaissance corsets. These contraptions didn't just restrict movement, they permanently altered rib cages over time. The process started young. Girls as young as 7 wore lightly boned bodices to train their torsos into the preferred tube shape. By adolescence, they progressed to tighter versions that compressed the lower ribs. Wealthy women had servants pull the laces so tightly that fainting was common. Special fainting rooms were set aside at parties for recoveries. Some doctors warned that extreme tight lacing could crack ribs, but nobody listened. A narrow waist was worth the pain. The construction was brutal. Early corsets used up to 60 individual pieces of baleen, whalebone, sewn into multiple layers of linen. The bones were sharp enough to pierce fabric, if not sanded perfectly smooth, leading to frequent skin punctures. Metal-reinforced versions worn by German nobility weighed nearly 8 pounds, the equivalent of strapping a medieval helmet around your torso all day. Some Italian designs included a wooden busk down the center front that prevented any bending at the waist. Movement became a calculated ordeal. Women learned to glide rather than walk, keeping their upper bodies unnaturally still. Reaching overhead could cause the boning to jab into the armpits or hips. Sitting required carefully positioned stools with back supports. Ordinary benches were too low for rigid torsos to bend onto. Even breathing was restricted to shallow sips of air, creating the coveted heaving bosom effect from strained respiration. The health consequences piled up. Autopsy records from the period show deformed livers from constant pressure. Some skeletons reveal rib cages compressed into triangular shapes after decades of corset wear. Digestive issues were rampant, tight lacing displaced stomachs and intestines, causing chronic acid reflux and constipation. Pregnant women often miscarried from the pressure, yet many continued wearing modified corsets throughout pregnancies to maintain appearances. The psychological control was just as severe. Tight lacing became a moral issue. A loose corset signaled loose morals. Etiquette manuals warned that proper women should always dress with assistance, as struggling into restrictive garments alone might lead to immodest movements. Some convents used corset lacing as punishment, tightening disobedient nuns' garments until they could barely breathe. The message was clear: control of the body equaled control of the soul. Wealthy women had it worst. Their corsets were the stiffest and tightest, requiring multiple servants to lace them. Surviving garments show reinforced stitching where the laces pulled with enough force to tear fabric. Some noble women's diaries recorded their daily waist measurements alongside prayer routines, tracking their progress toward the Holy Grail, a waist so small their hands could fully encircle it. Accounts exist of women removing ribs to achieve this, though historians debate how common that actually was. Working-class women wore simpler versions, but couldn't avoid the trend entirely. Peasants stiffened their bodices with whatever was available: dried reeds, rolled parchment, even bundled twigs. These makeshift versions offered less extreme shaping, but still restricted movement for fieldwork. Market vendors often loosened their laces during the day, then tightened them again before returning home to avoid husband's disapproval. The pressure spanned all social classes. Oddly, the church was conflicted. While some clergy condemned corsets as vanity, others praised them for containing female lust. Medical opinions were equally split. Some doctors claimed corsets prevented hysteria by supporting weak female constitutions. Others correctly noted they caused organ damage. The debate didn't matter, fashion won. By the late Middle Ages, a proper outfit required some form of body shaping, regardless of the consequences. The garments affected even mundane activities. Example: writing a letter required special angled desks so corseted women could reach the surface. Eating became an art form. Tight lacing meant only small bites could be swallowed, reinforcing dainty eating habits. Dancing adapted to the stiffness, with coordinated turns that prevented sudden moves that might dislodge boning. Pain was built into every activity. Some women resisted. A few brave souls wrote pamphlets protesting the practice, pointing out men weren't expected to deform themselves for fashion. Others secretly wore looser versions under bulky outer garments. But most complied, lacing themselves tighter each year in an escalating race toward an impossible ideal. Mothers taught daughters this ritual just as they'd been taught, perpetuating the cycle. The legacy lingers in modern medicine. The term corset disease still describes conditions like acid reflux and shallow breathing caused by constrictive clothing. Some posture corrections used today originated as ways to compensate for corset-induced deformities. Even modern bras inherit design elements from these torture devices. The underwire is a direct descendant of medieval whalebone. What began as a fashion statement became full-body discipline. Corsets did not just shape waists, they shaped lives, dictating how women moved, breathed, ate, and worked. They embodied medieval society's obsession with controlling female bodies down to the millimeter. And if a woman survived the corset, she faced another brutal standard, the clock. Because in medieval Europe, aging wasn't natural, it was a crime punishable by social death. In medieval Europe, turning 30 could ruin a woman's life. Wrinkles weren't just signs of age, they were walking indictments of failure. While older men were respected for their wisdom, women faced social invisibility the moment their first gray hair appeared. The ideal woman existed in suspended adolescence, old enough to bear children, but young enough to show no physical traces of having lived. Wealthy women fought back with dangerous methods. They rubbed mercury-laced creams on their faces to smooth wrinkles, poisoning themselves slowly. Some slept with raw meat strapped to their cheeks, believing animal fat would plump thinning skin. Others applied egg-white masks that hardened like plaster, temporarily stretching wrinkles but causing rashes. Venetian courtesans were known to soak their faces in morning urine. The urea was thought to preserve youthful texture, though it mainly caused burns. The church offered two bleak paths for aging women: either disappear gracefully behind veils as a pious matron, or embrace extreme asceticism until you resembled a living skeleton, the holy cadaver look some saints cultivated. Saint Colette of Corbie famously let her body waste away until her joints protruded, making her seem ageless in her emaciation. This became the loophole. If you couldn't stay young, you could starve yourself into something corpse-like enough to bypass normal aging standards. Middle-class women faked youth through cosmetics. Thinning hair was hidden under wigs made from peasant women's braids, often sold by desperate mothers. Yellow teeth were blackened intentionally with a medieval version of, "If you can't fix it, make it look deliberate." Some applied lead-based powders to simulate the translucent skin of adolescence, trading wrinkles for slow poisoning. The goal wasn't to look naturally young, but to erase any visible proof of lived experience. Married women faced particular cruelty. Wives who aged faster than their husbands were often swapped out for younger models. Divorce was difficult, but accidents happened. Courts rarely investigated when an older wife drowned in a shallow stream. Widows had to walk an impossible line, grieve visibly but not age too noticeably. Many were pressured to enter convents not for piety, but to conveniently vanish from society. Records show families bribing abbesses to take aging female relatives off their hands. Poor women aged faster from hard labor but oddly faced less scrutiny. A peasant woman's wrinkles were expected. The real sin was an aristocratic woman showing evidence of time's passage. Market sellers could gray openly, though they still rubbed bacon fat on their hands to hide work-worn skin. Servants mixed wine dregs into paste to stain age spots on their faces, making them look artificially preserved for their mistress's comfort. The beauty-to-bone pipeline was ruthlessly efficient. Once a woman's looks faded, she was repurposed. Former beauties became governesses or chaperones, their faded faces serving as warnings to younger women. Some noble households kept aging women around as admirable examples of past perfection, like living portraits. Others were shuffled off to distant country estates where their decline wouldn't embarrass the family. The luckiest became midwives, where their wrinkles could be passed off as wisdom. The psychological toll surfaced in odd ways. Some women deliberately cultivated illnesses to explain their fading looks. Others staged elaborate retirements, where they pretended to choose seclusion. Letters between noble families show frantic negotiations to marry off daughters before visible aging set in one Florentine contract specified the bride must be not above 19 years nor bearing marks of exceeding that number. Medical texts of the period blamed women for their own aging. One physician claimed wrinkles formed when women thought immoral thoughts, causing internal acids to etch lines in their faces. Another suggested aged skin resulted from insufficient bleeding during menstruation. Remedies included drinking powdered pearls mixed with vinegar or bathing in donkey milk treatments only the rich could afford, reinforcing class divides and visible aging. Even afterlife depictions reinforced this. Medieval art showed young women ascending to heaven while older women were disproportionately featured in hell scenes. Tomb sculptures often portrayed noble women decades younger than their age, at death families paying artists to literally carve lies into stone. The message was clear. Aging was such a spiritual failing that it required posthumous photoshopping. Some outliers resisted. Christine de Pizan wrote angrily about older women's treatment, asking why men's wrinkles denoted experience while women's signaled decay. A few wealthy widows flaunted their age by commissioning unflattering portraits. One German countess had herself painted with jowls prominently displayed, daring viewers to comment. But these were exceptions in a culture that equated female aging with societal rot. The industrial scale of anti-aging efforts was staggering. Monasteries bred special rabbits for their urine, sold as a wrinkle rinse. Apothecaries stocked virgin's tears, salt water with rose oil, for eye bags. Barber surgeons offered face-tightening procedures where they literally stitched back loose skin with silk thread. The pain was horrific, but women lined up anyway, better temporary agony than permanent invisibility. This panic wasn't really about beauty. It was about control. Aging women had knowledge, property rights, and sexual experience, three things medieval patriarchy feared. By making aging shameful, society ensured women remained insecure and dependent. Even wealthy widows with land often gave it up to sons or the church, just to avoid being labeled greedy old crones. The system protected itself by turning time into women's enemy. The consequences shaped medical history. Many early potions and procedures pioneered for anti-aging became the foundations of modern cosmetics. The concept of preventative aging care started here, with medieval women slathering toxic creams in desperate prevention attempts. Even today's obsession with aging gracefully carries echoes. We've just swapped mercury for retinol while keeping the same underlying anxiety. But wrinkles were only one way women could fall from grace. An unlucky birthmark, a scar from smallpox, or simply features that didn't conform to current trends could brand someone permanently. Because in medieval Europe, being ugly wasn't just unfortunate, it was criminal. And punishment wasn't social exclusion, it could mean literal execution. In medieval Europe, an ugly woman wasn't just unattractive, she was dangerous. Any physical difference, a birthmark, a crooked nose, even just being naturally thin could get you accused of witchcraft. The logic was simple. If beauty reflected divine favor, then ugliness must signal the opposite. Records from witch trials show how often appearance decided guilt. Women with facial moles were routinely prosecuted, as were those with disabilities. One midwife named Hilda was burned because prosecutors claimed her hunched back proved she carried the devil's weight. The beauty standards weren't just preferences, they were legal traps. Church teachings explicitly linked physical flaws to moral corruption. A 14th century church manual listed ill-favored countenance as evidence of possible heresy. At least 12 women in the Bamberg witch trials were convicted partly due to unpleasant facial symmetry. This wasn't accidental. Accusers knew judges would take these claims seriously. Even natural aging could be hazardous. Older women with wrinkly skin were frequent targets because their appearance matched stereotypes of crones in morality tales. Christine de Pizan, one of the few medieval feminists, openly criticized this system. She argued that judging women by their looks was both irrational and cruel. Naturally, male scholars mocked her for it. One theologian responded that, "A woman's virtue shines through her face, as dung shows through a thin sack." That kind of logic made it impossible to win. If accused, your appearance damned you, and protesting confirmed your guilt. Survival required constant vigilance. Some women deliberately cultivated bland, neutral faces to avoid standing out. Others sought protection through marriage or convent life, though neither guaranteed safety. Servants had it worst. Their rough hands and weathered faces made them easy scapegoats. Court records show servants accused of witchcraft at 10 times the rate of noblewomen. One trial in York featured a maid whose only crime was having uneven eyebrows, interpreted as the mark of a deceitful nature. The standard shifted constantly to maintain control. During famine years, when everyone looked gaunt, suddenly plumpness seemed suspicious. After plagues left survivors pockmarked, clear skin became unnatural. Authorities exploited this, using beauty norms to purge unwanted women. Widows who inherited property often found themselves accused of witchcraft shortly after their husbands' deaths. Investigations would note their shrewish brow or unseemly posture as evidence. Conveniently, confiscated property then went to the church or local lords. Medical conditions became death sentences. Psoriasis, clearly leprosy sent by the devil. A limp, obviously demonic possession. Even something as harmless as alopecia could doom a woman. Patchy hair was considered a classic witch's trait. Doctors compounded the problem by diagnosing unnatural appearances as signs of moral decay. One physician claimed crooked teeth proved a woman had lied repeatedly, as falsehoods twist the body like rot in wood. The insanity peaked during the witch panic of the 15th, 17th centuries, but the roots were medieval. Art from the period shows ugly characters as villains while heroes and saints conform to beauty ideals. These images trained people to associate aesthetics with morality every time they entered a church. Priests reinforced it through sermons warning that the devil clothes evil in foul shapes. By the time witch trials began, the connections were baked into culture. Some women fought back creatively. There are accounts of accused women deliberately exaggerating their ugly features during trials to mock the proceedings. Others pointed out that Jesus himself was described as homely in Scripture, a risky move that sometimes worked. A few learned to use their looks strategically. One woman in Bordeaux avoided execution by letting authorities believe her facial scar gave her magical sight, which they then used to hunt other witches. Temporary survival, but it came at a moral cost. The system's cruelty was its point, keeping women terrified of being branded ugly or worse. Becoming ugly through injury or age made them easier to control. It also kept them competing with each other, instead of questioning the rules. Neighbors would report each other for minor flaws to deflect suspicion from themselves. Mothers taught daughters to scrutinize every reflection for potential red flags. The result was a population policing itself to avoid becoming the next target. Modern remnants of this thinking still linger. Studies show unattractive people receive harsher legal sentences, just as they did in medieval courts. The phrase, resting witch face, isn't just a joke. It's an unconscious callback to when a scowling expression could get you killed. Even today's beauty standards often pathologize natural variations as flaws needing correction, echoing medieval logic about defective appearances. But here's what medieval women understood that we often forget. The system wasn't really about beauty or even about witches. It was about maintaining hierarchies. By making ugliness a moral failing, authorities could justify punishing anyone who stepped out of line. A noblewoman gaining too much influence? Suddenly her slightly large nose became proof of evil. A peasant woman succeeding in business? Her calloused hands revealed dark magic at work. Some women turned this logic against their oppressors. They realized if society judged books by their covers, they could weaponize those judgments. Agnes Sorel, mistress to Charles VII of France, deliberately set beauty trends that gave her political leverage. Venetian courtesans mastered the art of manipulating admirers through calculated appearances. These women played the game brilliantly, but always on the razor's edge between power and peril. Because beauty could be a weapon, but everyone knew weapons could backfire. Next, we'll see how these personal struggles became codified into actual laws controlling women's appearances rules enforced by fines, public shaming, and even imprisonment. Because medieval authorities didn't leave beauty standards to chance, they wrote them into legal statutes with real teeth. A handful of medieval women realized beauty standards could be hacked for power. But this wasn't empowerment. It was high-stakes gambling where the house always won eventually. Take Agnes Sorel, mistress to King Charles VII of France. She didn't just wear fashionable clothes, she invented new trends that forced the court to pay attention. Her signature move? Wearing daringly low necklines that showed more skin than anyone dared. The scandal made her unforgettable, giving her leverage over political decisions. She became the first officially recognized royal mistress in France, getting gifts of castles and titles. But the moment her influence overshadowed the queen's, rumors spread that she'd poisoned herself with mercury face creams. Whether true or not, the story stuck a cautionary tale about what happened when beauty threatened the established order. Isabella of Castile played a different game. She knew blonde hair symbolized purity, so when she sought the Spanish throne, she leaned into the image. Paintings show her with unnaturally lightened hair, framing her face like gleaming armor. She wore modest but exquisite gowns that communicated virtue and wealth simultaneously. Her carefully crafted appearance helped convince nobles she was divinely chosen to rule despite being a woman in a man's world. But even she couldn't control the narrative forever. Later portraits show her aging face being quietly edited to preserve political legitimacy. Success came with strings attached. Venetian courtesans turned this into a science. The most sought after, women like Veronica Franco, didn't just rely on looks, they weaponized every beauty standard. They wore platform shoes so tall, they needed servants' help to walk, signaling they didn't need practicality. Their pearl-encrusted gowns cost more than some nobles' annual incomes, proving their worth beyond sexuality. They learned poetry and politics, so their beauty wasn't ornamental but authoritative. For a brief window, they operated like celebrities, and diplomats rolled into one. Franco herself negotiated with kings while maintaining her elite clientele. But the foundation was shaky. When the church cracked down on courtesans, many were suddenly ugly overnight, their sophisticated style reinterpreted as gaudiness, their intelligence rebranded as deceit. The risks were extreme. Beauty could open doors, but those doors often led to rooms with no exits. Christine de Pizan wrote about watching her friend's transformation, a woman who leveraged her looks to become advisor to a duchess. At first, it worked perfectly. She dictated fashion trends that covertly signaled political alliances. Her hairstyle changes tipped off observers about shifting court dynamics. But when the duchess fell from power, the same beauty became evidence of witchcraft. She died in prison, her famous looks now proof of devil's magic. As de Pizan noted bitterly, what was praised as roses in spring becomes thorns by winter. Even royalty faced this trap. Eleanor of Aquitaine famously used her beauty and charm to become queen of both France and England. Her courts became cultural hubs, attracting troubadours and intellectuals. But when she tried wielding real political power, suddenly chroniclers emphasized her shrill voice and unseemly ambitions. Her former beauty was recast as sinister manipulation. Joanna I of Naples had a similar trajectory, praised for her golden hair until she made unpopular decisions, after which it became proof of childish vanity. The lifespan of this power was brutally short. Most successful beauty manipulators had about 5 good years between reaching peak influence and becoming targets. Aging was dangerous, but so was success. Too much influence triggered backlash. French courtier Diane de Poitiers managed an unusually long run by carefully maintaining porcelain skin and golden hair into her 60s, while never openly challenging the queen. But even she was eventually banished, her famous beauty now called unnatural preservation, hinting at witchcraft. The temporary nature of this power shaped how women used it. Many invested in tangible assets, quickly buying property or securing pensions before their looks faded. Others cultivated protégés to maintain influence indirectly. Venetian courtesan Tullia d'Aragona published books so her ideas would outlast her beauty. Some staged dramatic retreats to convents, controlling their narratives before others could. Men understood this system too. King Henry VIII's famous saying, "I make kings, I unmake them," applied equally to beautiful women. Anne Boleyn's rise and fall followed this script precisely. Her distinctive French hood and dark eyes initially charmed the court, then later proved she'd enchanted the king. What giveth could always taketh away. The cruelest twist? Many successful women became trapped by their own strategies. Once you proved beauty could wield power, you couldn't stop performing. Marguerite de Valois spent fortunes maintaining her legendary beauty while secretly suffering from migraines caused by lead makeup. When smallpox scars appeared despite her efforts, she wore elaborate silver masks that terrified visitors. The performance had to continue even when the script turned horrific. Some tried reinventing themselves. A few aging courtesans became respected writers. Others pivoted to patron roles, backing younger beauties like venture capitalists. But society never forgot their origins. Death records often reduced even powerful women to their former appearances, once the fairest in Venice, or formerly called the Pearl of Normandy. For every woman who temporarily won this game, thousands lost. The average lifespan of a court beauty was shockingly short. Many died from beauty treatments, lead poisoning, infected hair removal wounds, corset-related organ damage. Others were discarded as tastes changed. England's Edward II kept a rolling court of beauties who were quietly replaced whenever fashion shifted. The takeaway wasn't subtle. Beauty could be power, but power borrowed on beauty's terms. Like taking out a loan with impossible interest. You might enjoy temporary riches, but the debt always came due. And medieval society made sure women paid in full with their health, dignity, and sometimes lives. This wasn't just social pressure, it was institutional. Because while individual women navigated these dangers, governments were busy writing beauty standards into actual law. Your outfit choices could land you in jail, your hairstyle might bankrupt you, and wearing the wrong color could get you exiled. The rules weren't suggestions, they came with teeth. In medieval Europe, your wardrobe choices could get you arrested. Governments didn't just suggest beauty standards, they enforced them with fines, public humiliations, and jail time. Sumptuary laws dictated exactly who could wear what, down to the thread count of your linen. These weren't minor regulations, they were tools to keep everyone in their proper place. A merchant's wife wearing silk? That's a month's wages fined. A servant caught in fur-lined sleeves? Public flogging. The laws made sure your appearance screamed your social status before you even opened your mouth. Color was the most tightly controlled. Purple wasn't just expensive, it was imperial property. In Byzantium, wearing unauthorized purple could cost you your hands. Saffron-dyed yellow became such a status symbol in Venice that the government restricted it to nobility. Even stripes were policed. Florence banned them entirely as too frivolous. The reasoning was blatant. If lower classes looked fancy, how would anyone know they were lower class? Enforcement was performative too. Authorities staged public fabric burnings where illegal garments went up in flames as warnings. Tailors kept detailed client records because if they sewed an illegal outfit, both wearer and stitcher faced punishment. The laws got absurdly specific. In England, only royalty could wear cloth of gold. Knights got to wear velvet, but only if they earned over £200 a year. Prostitutes in Paris had to wear striped hoods so everyone could spot them. Some cities required Jewish residents to wear yellow circles, making beauty regulations inseparable from persecution. Even accessories weren't safe. Genoa banned pearl hairnets for anyone below aristocratic rank. The message was clear. Looking above your station wasn't just tacky, it was treasonous. Wealthy widows faced particular scrutiny. Many laws targeted them specifically, afraid they'd use dead husbands' wealth to dress above their widow status. A Frankfurt statute forced widows to switch to plain veils within 6 months of bereavement. London fined widows for wearing excessively soft gloves. The system was rigged. If a widow remarried someone richer, she could upgrade her wardrobe. If she stayed single, she'd better dress like a nun. Oddly, the church backed these laws fiercely. Priests preached that sumptuary laws prevented vanity, but really they protected elite privilege. When a Bolognese merchant's daughter wore silver-threaded sleeves to Mass, the bishop had them ripped off mid-service. In Florence, luxury-hating friars organized bonfires of vanities, where they burned wigs, makeup, and fancy clothes in the town square. Yet nobody burned the Pope's silk robes or a cardinal's ruby rings. Peasants had their own bizarre restrictions. Many villages required farmers to wear coarse peasant blue or brown so they'd look appropriately humble. Some laws banned them from wearing shoes in town unless it rained. In Scotland, mill workers could be fined for washing their wool tunics, too often appearing too clean. Suggested they weren't working hard enough. Men weren't exempt. Knights who returned from crusades, wearing luxurious Eastern fabrics, often faced fines. Young nobles blew inheritances on illegal French doublets and Spanish leather boots, prompting angry laws like England's 1,363 statute limiting shoe toe length. Pointed toes got so extreme that Parliament decreed no shoe points could exceed 2 inches. Enforcers literally carried measuring sticks. The punishments were creative. A Zurich woman caught wearing illegal gold trim had to parade through town wearing the offending garment inside out. Venetian merchants trading in forbidden silks were forced to stand in the Rialto wearing donkey masks. French authorities shaved the heads of women wearing too tall headdresses. The goal wasn't just punishment, it was theater, reminding everyone to stay in their lane. Some found loopholes. Wealthy commoners bought legal second-hand clothes from bankrupt nobles. Others paid fines as a cost of doing business. Florentine records show certain merchants budgeted for fashion violations like modern parking tickets. Clever seamstresses made reversible garments, austere wool on one side, forbidden silk on the other. A few cities even spawned underground markets where women rented illegal outfits by the hour. The laws kept shifting to maintain control. When black dye became cheaper in the 1400s, suddenly only nobility could wear it. As lace-making spread, laws popped up restricting who could wear how much. Even mourning customs got regulated after a wave of plague deaths. London limited mourning veils to 30 days lest too many people look aristocratic. The legacy lingers. Modern dress codes in schools and workplaces echo sumptuary logic, restricting certain hairstyles or enforcing gendered clothing. Luxury brands still function as status markers, just with price tags instead of laws. And fast fashion lets people mimic elite styles temporarily, an echo of renting forbidden silks. What medieval lawmakers understood was this: controlling appearances controls people. Dictate what they can wear, and you dictate how they're perceived. Limit their self-expression, and you limit their ability to rise. Beauty laws weren't about fabric, they were about power. And those power plays weren't just enforced by judges, they were painted into existence by artists who turned impossible standards into divine truth. Because medieval art didn't just reflect beauty ideals, it engineered them from scratch. Medieval art didn't show women, it told them what to be. Every illuminated manuscript, every tapestry, every painting was a blueprint for an impossible ideal. Artists didn't capture reality. They invented a fantasy world where women's bodies followed divine geometry. Faces were elongated like crescent moons. Necks stretched swan-like. Waists narrowed to widths that would crack ribs. These weren't portraits, they were instruction manuals in pigment and thread. Take the famous unicorn tapestries. At first glance, they're just pretty scenes of a hunt. Look closer. Every noble woman depicted has the same facial proportions. Foreheads absurdly high, brows nearly invisible, lips tiny as rosebuds. The unicorn, symbolizing purity, only approaches the flawless creatures. The message wasn't subtle. Match this impossible standard, or be unworthy of protection. Real women seeing these tapestries weren't admiring art, they were receiving orders. Religious art pushed this harder. Paintings of the Virgin Mary set the template. Oval face, sloping shoulders, hands delicate as spiderwebs. Local artists copied these features so relentlessly that regional styles emerged. Italian Marys had angular jaws. French versions sported pinched waists. German renditions added eerie elongation. Women sitting for portraits demanded these distortions. One noblewoman's diary complains her painter didn't make her neck sufficiently swan-like. Reality wasn't the goal. Conformity was. The editing happened in real time. Court painters kept beauty books, sketch collections of approved features to mix and match. A chin from this page, eyes from that one. Surviving account books show patrons paying extra to have imperfections painted out. One Italian duchess paid her artist double to extend her forehead in her portrait, starting a trend that left real women scrubbing their hairlines with pumice stones. The distortion wasn't passive. Artists used mathematical tricks to enforce ideals. The divine proportion supposedly revealed in nature's beauty was actually a rigid formula. Faces were divided into exact fractions. Eyes must be 1/5 the face's width, the nose 1/4 its length. Deviation wasn't artistic license, it was heresy. Painters who depicted realistic women risked losing commissions. One Flemish artist's contract explicitly required him to make the subject appear as the Blessed Virgin, though she be common-born. Sculpture added thread pressure. Cathedral statues of saintly women had waists so narrow they'd topple without hidden supports. Tomb effigies showed noble women with childlike features even when they died old. The effect was everywhere. Women walked past these stone ideals daily, a constant reminder of their shortcomings. Manuscripts targeted literate women directly. Moral guides featured illustrations of the ladder of beauty, showing spiritual ascent through physical transformation. Start as a plump peasant on the bottom rung. End as an emaciated saint at the top. Medical texts blurred the line further. Anatomy drawings depicted ideal female forms rather than actual biology. One midwife's manual showed birth canals mysteriously narrower than any living woman's pelvis. The psychological impact was brutal. Letters between noblewomen reveal fixation on matching painted ideals. A French countess wrote to her sister about fasting to achieve the see-through pallor of a chapel fresco. An English merchant's wife commissioned copies of a duchess's portrait to guide her seamstress. The original subject had been painted with a 17-inch waist, physically impossible without removing ribs. Oddly, this warped reality helped some women. Clever ones recognized the game. Isabella d'Este ordered portraits copied from classic beauties, then used the paintings to negotiate political marriages. Others manipulated the system. A Venetian courtesan had herself painted resembling a famous saint, then leveraged the likeness to attract powerful clients. But these were exceptions. Most women suffered under the weight of comparison. Artists knew what they were doing. Contracts show they charged more for improving plain subjects than for accurate depictions. Some kept 2 sets of brushes, fine sable for nobility, coarse hog hair for commoners, ensuring even the paint strokes reinforced hierarchy. The best painters developed tricks to flatter, thinning noses with shadow, enlarging eyes with clever highlights. One Florentine's notebook advised, "If the lady be thick of waist, place her near a column that she may seem slender by comparison." The church weaponized this. Priests commissioned art showing voluptuous women burning in hell while slender ones ascended to heaven. A famous triptych in Ghent juxtaposed Adam and Eve's fallen fleshy bodies with the Virgin Mary's streamlined perfection. Sunday sermons would gesture to these images while warning against vanity, never acknowledging that the church itself paid for these impossible standards. Peasants got their own twisted versions. Woodcuts and cheap pamphlets portrayed ideal farm girls as rosy-cheeked but gaunt, productive enough to work, but not so well-fed they'd forget their place. Tavern signs showed barmaids with waists narrower than the beer steins they carried. Even in poverty, the message was clear. Your body exists to be measured against fantasy. The cruelty had purpose. By making beauty standards seem divinely ordained, authorities made them harder to question. If art showed the Virgin Mary with a 12-inch waist, who could argue against corsets? If saints' portraits had featureless faces, how could real women claim expression as a right? Art didn't reflect power structures, it built and maintained them. Some fought back. A handful of wealthy women commissioned unflattering portraits to spite critics. Christine de Pizan wrote sarcastically about painters who make ladies into dolls no living flesh could mimic, but these were drops in an ocean of propaganda. For every woman who saw through the lies, thousands internalized them as truth. The legacy lingers. Modern photoshopping continues what medieval painters started: erasing flaws, elongating limbs, creating inhuman ideals. The tools changed, but the game remains identical. Tell women they're inadequate, then sell them the solution. Medieval women couldn't escape the fantasies painted on chapel walls. Today's versions just glow brighter on smartphone screens. The beauty standards of medieval Europe never disappeared. They just swapped lead makeup for retinol serums and whalebone corsets for waist trainers. We like to think we've progressed, but the script remains eerily familiar. Social media has become the new illuminated manuscript, broadcasting impossible ideals with algorithmic precision. Where women once studied religious art for guidance, they now scroll through Instagram filters that elongate necks and smooth skin. With the same distortions medieval painters used. Take aging anxiety. Modern women spend fortunes on anti-wrinkle creams, just as medieval women rubbed mercury paste on their faces. The difference? Now it's called skincare science instead of witchcraft. A 2023 study found women start worrying about wrinkles at 20s, even younger than some medieval brides. Cosmetic companies prey on this fear, much like apothecaries selling Virgin's Tears eye serums. The language softened, but the message didn't. Aging is still a social crime. The high forehead obsession evolved too. Where medieval women plucked hairlines, modern ones get hair transplants or wear wigs labeled natural looking. The 2020s trend for clean girl aesthetics demands the same blank, expressionless beauty that signaled virtue in the 1400s. Celebrity stylists even recycle medieval tricks: tight ponytails that pull hairlines back, mimic the effects of those old forehead plucking rituals. Social media policing mirrors sumptuary laws. TikTok comments roast outfits as aggressively as medieval town criers, shaming improperly dressed women. Luxury brands function like feudal class markers. Wearing the right label proves status, just as purple dye once did. Online influencers have become the new clergy, preaching devotional routines of serums and supplements. The medieval ladder of beauty now appears as viral hashtags. That girl routines promising transcendence through self-denial. Even corsets made a comeback. Modern shapewear brands boast space-age fabrics, but their function matches medieval designs. Celebrities credit waist trainers for their figures, ignoring how their organs shift just like Catherine de Medici's did. Corset sales doubled during the pandemic. Apparently working from home required as much bodily control as court life. The ugliness equals evil trope persists in subtler ways. Studies show unattractive defendants get longer sentences, echoing medieval witch trials. Job applicants with acne earn less than clear-skinned peers, much like pockmarked medieval brides fetched smaller dowries. Hollywood still casts beautiful actors as heroes and character actors as villains. We've swapped burnings at the stake for Instagram shadow bans, but the principle remains. Deviation from beauty norms carries penalties. Ironically, today's body positivity movements face medieval-style backlash. Women rejecting beauty standards get called lazy or unclean, echoing criticisms of medieval nuns who refuse to pluck their brows. Plus-size influencers deal with harassment that mirrors what overweight noblewomen endured when they couldn't achieve the starvation aesthetic. The cycle continues because beauty was never about aesthetics, it's about control. The business model barely changed. Where medieval cities taxed saffron and silk, modern ones profit from luxury sales taxes. Influencers hawk golden razors like they're the second coming of saffron hair dye. The beauty industry still targets female insecurity, just with clinical terminology, collagen depletion, instead of moral decay. Market researchers found women spend 300 extra hours yearly on appearance. Related activities roughly the time medieval women spent on lead makeup and hair bleaching. Some things regressed. Medieval women at least had class-specific rules. Modern ones face universal pressure. Everyone should look both wealthy and natural, both youthful and mature, both thin and curvy. The contradictions multiply while the stakes stay life or death. Suicide rates spike after cosmetic surgery failures, mirroring medieval deaths from beauty treatments. Eating disorder admissions doubled in a decade, new versions of holy anorexia without the religious payoff. Even resistance follows old patterns. The natural hair movement battles the same biases medieval brunettes faced. Tattoos and piercings replace witch marks as rebellion badges. Some feminists reject beauty norms entirely, just as medieval mystics like Hildegard of Bingen flouted conventions. But systemic change remains elusive because the problem isn't vanity, it's power. Corporate marketing departments now do what medieval artists did: profit from manufactured inadequacy. Photo editing tools surpass any medieval painter's tricks. Where artists once stretched necks in portraits, apps now reshape jaws with a slider. Filters don't just enhance, they enforce homogeneity, crafting the same face across continents much like those Virgin Mary templates did. The twist? Awareness hasn't helped. Even knowing these standards are constructed doesn't loosen their grip. Studies show women who recognize photo editing still feel worse about their bodies. After seeing manipulated images, the cognitive dissonance mirrors medieval women who knew lead makeup was poisonous, but used it anyway. Underneath the modern packaging, the calculus remains unchanged. Conform and suffer, or resist and face consequences. Medieval women risked poisoning for pale skin. Modern ones risk skin cancer from tanning beds chasing the opposite ideal. The tools got safer, but the self-harm continues because the punishment for opting out still outweighs the costs of compliance. History doesn't repeat, it reloads. Today's beauty standards are medieval ones with better PR. The unicorn tapestries became Instagram grids. Lead makeup became BB cream. The evil ugly woman trope became Hollywood casting. The systems adapt, but the goal stays the same. Keep women too preoccupied with self-scrutiny to question who benefits. The closet full of unused gym memberships and expired serums isn't personal failure. It's the latest chapter in a very old play. Recognizing these patterns won't dismantle them overnight, but it might help rewrite the next scene. Because if there's one lesson medieval women's struggles teach us, it's that beauty standards aren't about how we look, they're about what will endure to be seen as human. That realization changes everything. The past isn't just history, it's a mirror reflecting why we still can't look away from our own reflections. And that's worth remembering next time someone tries selling you another bottle of snake oil renamed as empowerment. Like the medieval women who painted their veins blue to appear fragile and noble, we're still performing, we've just swapped the stage. The final curtain hasn't fallen, the play continues, the script needs revising. Here's the thing, medieval beauty standards were never actually about beauty. They were a system, a way to enforce social hierarchy, morality, and power. The lead makeup, plucked hairlines, starvation diets, they weren't choices. They were requirements for survival in a world that judged women's worth by impossible ideals. So next time you feel that pressure to conform, to buy the serum, skip the meal, hide the wrinkle, remember, you're performing in a play written centuries ago. The costumes changed, but the script's the same. Maybe it's time to rip it up, because beauty's always been theater. But backstage, that's where the real you gets to exist.